subaltern Bangladeshi Hindus. Well, let's start this way. Whether we apply the concept to South Asian Hindus, or as we're doing today, or to colonized peoples anywhere, which is how it was originally formulated, the essence of subaltern is that others determine who can speak authoritatively for a people. The other aspect of it is it so demoralizes the subaltern population that many among them, knowingly or not, buy into it. And we're going to get into that. But that's the context within which I'm going to talk about being subaltern today. Classic sociological theory, which is what I was trained in, took note of a related phenomenon more than a century ago called the definition of the situation. It's a great concept, and I love it. It recognizes that all of us interact on the basis of rules, understandings, cultural definitions, things like that. And it also recognizes, we're not born with these things. We learn them. So the critical question for us is, where do we learn them? And from whom? Because whoever gets to define which ones we use controls the situation. And here's an example of how the concept works. I'm one of many people working to try and stop Bangladesh's move towards China, which is happening pretty definitely. Those people who disagree with us define the situation this way. Well, China is an Asian brother who provides needed funds that less developed countries need for things like infrastructure. So we don't have to wait for permission from some Western power. But those who agree with me define the situation this way. China is a predatory lender that uses these loans as a pretext to seize strategic assets such as ports in Sri Lanka and Pakistan. Its goal is not to help these countries, but to dominate them. See, it's the same situation, two very different definitions and two very different courses of actions based on those definitions. And that's what's significant. By the way, you might ask yourself, who controls your definition of situations? Where did you learn the assumptions on which you interact? And I'll just throw it out there and let you contemplate that for a bit. But the concept goes deeper than that. As you know, as Arjun just mentioned, I've devoted much of my life to fighting the ethnic cleansing of Bangladeshi Hindus. And of course, saving lives must be our top priority. But, really, if all I'm doing is redefining the situation for them, in a sense, I'm no different than the British Raj or the Awami League. My goal is and must be for the Bangladeshi Hindus to redefine that situation as a dangerous one and one that they can change. I learned this years ago in a makeshift camp in northern Bengal. When I asked the Hindu refugees there, what do you want me to do? And several of them said, we want you to give us our rights, which I thought about and replied, I can't do that. Those rights are not mine to give. They're yours, and I want to help you claim what's yours. And besides, if I can give them to you, I can take them away, and that's a situation neither of us want. In other words, these Hindu refugees, Bangladeshi Hindu refugees, defined their situation as a powerless one in which only others with power can do good things for them and defeat a different set of others, powerful others, who are doing bad things. But they didn't consider that they had the power to change things. Now, I was a bit naive back then and brought my own cultural definitions about inalienable rights. I figured all I had to do was make the case, which seemed pretty clear to me, and just provide support. But I hadn't counted on how being subaltern beat these people down so much they didn't even realize they accepted their oppressor's definition of the situation. And that's the essence of being subaltern, allowing others to define us and accepting our invisibility and rightlessness as somehow being warranted. Pardon me, excuse me. But if we understand this, we can overcome it. We'll know what to fight and how to fight it, so let's get started. Now, the subaltern concept grew out of a Marxist perspective, and I don't usually find Marx's ideas useful, but this one is, but not because of its workers of the world unite roots. Besides exposing a brutal process, it shows us whose idea of truth begins and ends with a restricted number of elites versus those who go to a variety of sources for their information, who go to the people for their information, who understand that the importance of life for the people from the people's perspective, instead of from some elective other who's given a divine right to tell their story. And it also means what often passes for authoritative analysis, especially here in the West, suffers from this limited and limiting perspective. And we owe it to those populations to refrain from making the same mistake and expose its bias when others don't refrain. And of course, nowhere has this been more destructive than in South Asia, which is why we're talking about it today. And but I want to take a side moment. Cracking that, I believe, has been one of the most significant achievements of the Modi phenomenon. Previous Indian governments often bought into that sense of Western superiority, overly concerned with what this or that Western power or individual might think. The UPA coalition's referent was Europe and its soft socialism. But Modi said, yeah, I don't think so. We're as good as anyone else. We'll be telling our own story, thank you very much. It's very common for me to be speaking in India, and one of my Indian colleagues would speak before me and say something, and his South Asian audience would give a very tepid response for say nothing. Then I would get up, say the very same thing, and the same audience would give me a whole bunch of oohs and ahs, and like I said something incredibly unique. And this was always so embarrassing, and partly because I think Americans are just viscerally embarrassed by this sort of thing. But the other thing is, my friend, and I'm thinking of my good friend in Delhi, Amitav Tripathi in particular, he knows a lot, and he has really good insights that have become very important in my work. But unfortunately, our South Asian audience didn't get those insights. And that's because of this legacy of colonialism. And the other thing, it really didn't matter if those people liked what this particular white Westerner said. The damage was done because they accepted this authority hierarchy, which somehow gave the West, Westerners some right to speak for them. So whether you like Modi or not, I happen to really like him and what he's done. You can't deny this shift in perspective and power. Recognize also that most of the information we get is driven by ideology, political or religious alliances, self-interest, even conspiracy theories. It's not objective, often not even accurate. And we have to apply the same exacting standards to verify it as we would in any academic venture. And I'm sure most of you know what those things are. But if we listen only to the same elites and uncritically let them define the situation for us, we're going to sign on to a lot of bad stuff, regardless of what our intentions are. An example, recently I was part of a seminar on forced conversion. The convener told me that there would be segments on Hindus in Bangladesh, which was mine, Coptic Christians in Egypt, another very serious matter, by the way, and, I'm quoting him, Muslims in India. I asked him who's forcibly converting Muslims in India. He replied that some people from the International Religious Freedom Summit, which we had both attended, said it was a bad situation that he had to address. Well, the discussion was supposed to end there, but instead I asked him, and by the way, what I do now, this is really the key to breaking the power of subaltern concept. Instead, I asked him, well, what data did they send you to support their assertions? Because I know that the others of us, we gave him mountains of data. So he said he would send it to me, and he sent me 3 internet articles, which was the sum total of all they sent him. So after securing his consent, I analyzed those articles and showed him their bias, their poor data, misinformation, and so forth. And to Mr. Yee's credit, he dropped them and proceeded with Bangladeshi Hindus and Coptic Christians. More than that, his organization is working on a congressional resolution and dropped Indian Muslims from that too. In other words, you fight it with facts. The powerful coterie of academics, diplomats, and others that have a visceral dislike for India. Now, they've always been bolstered by the left, who since Modi have been joined by a rather unlikely ally, right-wing evangelical Christians. Their visceral hatred comes from the Modi administration's actions against coercive conversions that Christian missionaries in India never had to bother about before. Well, as you can imagine, it's not easy fighting left and right at the same time. Those of you with military experience, it's kind of like fighting a two-front war. But it's not impossible. You do it, again, by challenging their data and by being as tough on yourself and your associates when you have data you believe supports your position. You've got to be just as rigorous. And that's what we did. You see, again, it wasn't about Christians or Muslims or any other religious or social group. We focus on data and the scientific method. And we refuse to let others define the situation, which is important when that same group of India haters circulated an anti-India resolution in the United States. They got support for this because of who they were, but not because of the facts. But they thought facts didn't matter. They felt the political and ideological alliances were all they needed. It looked like they might be right because the resolution passed easily in 6 U.S. cities before it came to Chicago, and it was expected to sail through easily here. But something happened, something changed, something was different. Chicago's NRI Hindu community decided to fight it and insisted that they should be telling this story. They fought the haters with facts, and they also asked city council members why, with all the serious problems Chicago has, they're focused on India. I don't know how much is circulated globally, but within the United States at least, Chicago has kind of become shorthand for out-of-control crime and a city on the brink of financial ruin. Anyhow, but instead they were focused on India. They also, I'm sorry, hold on, I'm missing something, I'm sorry. Give me a moment. Sorry. They also got the Jewish community in Chicago to work with them a lot. We supported them, worked with them, and we raised our voices against those who co-opted the right to tell their story. Organizations like the Hindu American Foundation, Stand With Us, and the Middle East Forum got involved too. It was basically a grassroots effort. And this is also critical. Excuse me. Our Jewish community and organizations only got involved because the Hindu community asked for our help. Absolutely critical. This is their story and their fight. We will do everything we can, but as supporters, as friends, and we did. We were part of that effort. But again, as supporters and friends, we're not going to, try and make them subaltern here. Our opponents were so used to winning with ideology alone, by the way, that when we fought them with facts, they had no effective response. And so the resolution was defeated. It wasn't expected to, but it was defeated and defeated significantly. And by the way, my contact, my dear friend, longtime friend in the Hindu community, Dr. Bharat Barai, called me after the vote and told me that his contact on the city council told him that that these same people who brought the anti-India resolution were trying to bring an anti-Israel resolution, and he said, if that happens, the Hindu community will stand with the Jewish community as the Jewish community stood with the Hindu community. I mean, this is great stuff, and actually I'm working on more cooperation between our two communities. And by the way, again, they've been so successful, this was expected to be a traveling roadshow going from U.S. city to U.S. city to U.S. city, where the same small number of people would jam it through. But, again, they didn't know what hit them. They have not introduced it again since that time. So this is what happens when others tell our story, and what happens when we prevent them and tell our own. An Italian Marxist scholar, Antonio Gramsci, developed the concept of subaltern pushback against Europe's accepted truth that understood non-European peoples from the perspective of their European colonizers. For instance, India from the British, Indochina from the French, Congo from the Belgians, and so forth. The stories they told were driven by the colonizers' own self-interest, cultural assumption of their superiority, and cultural and religious imperialism. That's what those stories were based on. But though the British Raj died almost 75 years ago, this particular legacy of colonialism remains strong and explains our ongoing struggle against the fact-free demonization of Indian Hinduism, which we see here in school textbooks, and even anti-India slurs in the media. And thank goodness the Hindu American Foundation, along with many of us, are fighting this. But too many, both in the East and the West, never let go of the view that looked to the West, and particularly Europe, for information about non-Europeans. Subaltern Hindus under Bangladeshi rule might live in a post-colonial world, but they still look outside their community, hostile others telling their story, and they're no less invisible than when the British Raj defined their fathers. And by the way, I keep talking about the West. It's not because we're so great, but when we talk about the reason I talk about this with Bangladesh, we really control the pressure points that can make Bangladesh do something different. Now let's look at another example of how these concepts work. And you'll notice, by the way, how I bounce back and forth from theory to action, and that's because you really need both. I mean, theory's sterile without a connection to reality, and experience is chaotic without an overarching context. And it's also going to take both to stop the ethnic cleansing of Bangladesh's Hindus. We change assumptions about who's authorized to tell their story, and then use facts to fight for change. Another one. Several years ago, I was part of a government briefing about Bangladesh. And throughout the proceedings, a lot of people would very casually refer to Bangladesh as a Muslim nation, which, quite frankly, it's objectively correct. 90% of the population is Muslim. Islam is the official state religion. Even the first word of the Bangladeshi constitution is Bismillah. But when the audience was given a chance to ask questions, a Bangladeshi Hindu who was there got up and said, every time people refer to Bangladesh as a Muslim nation, I feel like a foreigner in my own country. And others there voiced their agreement. And I got to say, that young man will never know the impact he had on me, because it really drove home that the only way I was going to ever be of value in the fight to save the Bangladeshi Hindus was by going to South Asia, cities and villages, and listening to what the people said, not just the experts. I wasn't going to get anything done with a Google search, with second or third hand internet articles that our opponents try and pass off as facts, or by going to going to so-called experts. That young man told me that Bangladeshi Hindus are never allowed to tell their story. Really We're not even recognized as being authorities on the atrocities they face. Experts who never leave their offices in London or Washington are considered more credible. Bangladeshi governments and their hired guns put out consecrated word about Hindus, refusing to move off the fiction of Bangladesh as, and I'm using their words, not mine, a land of communal harmony. Now, we know better, but it's tough to get others to see it, because when we challenge this, we're challenging not just information, not just misinformation. We're blaspheming against their very worldview, and that's what makes this tough, and that explains their anger. In fact, one Bangladeshi general last year told me that he and his colleagues see opposing me as their patriotic duty, even if the facts are on my side. By the way, that's why people in Bangladesh charged with blasphemy are often charged with treason at the same time for the same thing. Let me, okay. We must never suspend our critical faculties and blindly accept what these experts tell us. Even as a child, my daughter would say to me, and this was her saying, question the man who tells you the sky is red. She'll be sure to challenge the man who tells you question the man who tells you the sky is blue. She'll be sure to challenge the man who tells you the sky is red. In other words, we can't go wrong by questioning what others tell us, but we can go terribly wrong if we don't. If anyone, by the way, and I mean anyone, me, your professors, politicians, or someone who claims to carry the mantle of human rights, make accusations that are all backed up by the same elites with little or nothing coming from the victims themselves, don't believe them. Challenge them. Fight them. Demand that they tell you tell you how they can substantiate their accusation. And if they're not being transparent, they're either being devious or they just don't care about the facts. Challenge them and make them care. Reject their assumptions of being entitled to speak for others. Remember, when we don't, we're being subaltern too. So what exactly do we mean when we refer to Bangladeshi Hindus as subaltern? We mean, first and foremost, the end of European colonialism did not mean the end of colonialist mentalities, whereby Bangladesh's subaltern Hindus accept their own subjugation to a government that denies them legal and social equality and equal access to the law. I'm going to skip this next part. Let's see. Okay. And the example I was going to give is about how some Hindu MPs in Bangladesh wanted to meet with me in 2013 when I was there. And when they did, I basically nailed them. I said, what are you guys doing? What are you doing to help the situation? And they gave you all kinds of excuses. And I mean, I really let them have it. I wouldn't let up because, I just spent weeks in villages with Hindus who really have no rights, have no power, who the police won't protect. And these guys who are MPs, they're 70 Hindu MPs, at least there were back then, are telling me, we really can't do anything because of the party. And the word I used, but I told them, I said, that's bullshit. And the problems are your problems are just an excuse for not doing what's right. But for the time being, I want to lay aside that aspect of subaltern Hindus because it's a real phenomenon. But spending too much time on it smacks of blaming the victim, which we can't do. Okay, now, as things stand now, Western elites, and I told you why I focus on the West, give credence to others for what is said about Bangladeshi Hindus, and those others include the Bangladeshi government and its acolytes as its employees. Now, there's nothing essentially evil about that or specifically anti-Hindu. It's the way things actually work. But, in fact, our government should be authorized to tell the story of all its people, regardless of our different faith, origins, or other tribal characteristics. And we do, they can do this in exchange for protection, equal access to the law, and the other benefits we get from living together in a society. That goes all the way back to Rousseau and Hobbes. And even though they disagreed on so much, this was something they agreed on. But that's theory. And in this case, the government of Bangladesh blocks Hindus' access to the law and will not protect them. By doing so, the Bangladeshi government has forfeited its right to claim to speak for them. But Western audiences don't recognize that abrogation of the social contract. It's a lousy situation. It really is. We got to get these people to see that the Bangladeshi government has ceded its right to speak for Hindus. Anyway, we got to do something about it. We can't stand by idly while innocent people are systematically destroyed. And something that Arjun, I know you referred to earlier. As a Jew, I got into this fight precisely because that's what most Europeans did when my people were being murdered. Or in a message that I like to say is specifically addressed to India, we can't shutter our shades and hide while our neighbors are being dragged away to their deaths, which is what's happening to Hindus in Bangladesh. Many in the West who can do something about this refuse to consider their position. As I said, it's an article of faith, so we're fighting religion. Most subaltern Hindus aren't even convinced that they have a right to take action against their own government in Bangladesh. Now that's changing, but not fast enough. Because according to many Bangladeshi human rights activists, they tell me that one of their greatest challenges is convincing young Hindus not to leave Bangladesh, but to stay and fight for it. Let's also recall Dhaka University's Professor Abu Barkat, one of their most renowned scholars, whose dire warning is that if things don't change, Hinduism will be dead in Bangladesh by mid-century. So what do we do? Well, to be effective, we first have to understand the Bangladeshi government will never do the right thing simply because it's the right thing to do. And I can tell you, especially with so much power aggregated to one person, one party now in Bangladesh, that's even less likely. But but when you're negotiating with them, don't let the Bangladeshi government pacify you with mere words and no action, because you know they're trying to do that. But the Bangladeshi government will do the right thing if we make it contrary to their interests to continue the carnage. And this is how I want to finish with what can we do. First, I want to congratulate India, because its 2019 NRC-CAA, and by the way, Arjun, this is what I wanted to talk about in that seminar where evidently, unfortunately, I got too sick and couldn't do it.
Yes, please, we can spare some time for that.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm just a little bit. The 2019 NRC-CAA marked the very first time. And you think about this. Think about Hinduism in India, and think about Hinduism in Bangladesh, how close it is, and what's happening to Hindus in Bangladesh. And we all know this. That law marked the first time an Indian government formally recognized that Hindus face persecution in Bangladesh. And the persecution was bad enough that India had to provide the victims with a safe haven. And that's a tremendous thing. Unfortunately, it's gotten a lot of protests and people saying it's discriminatory, and that's a lot of crap. I can tell you why it's not. And I did in a brief I was asked to file to the Indian Supreme Court in a case that we brought. Anyway, but we need to build on that. And again, defeat ideology with facts. We don't yet know everything that's going to come out of NRC-CAA with regards to this, but it provides a legal basis for India finally doing something about its oppressed neighbors. And I know a lot of people have been wanting Modi to do more, but Modi's got a lot of things on his plate, and he seems to be getting to different things within that context. But we'll just have to see. But this does provide a basis that wasn't there before. And by the way, when it does, India can do a whole lot of things. I mean, it controls the water flow into Bangladesh. I mean, it can undercut Bangladesh on the international market for ready-made garments, which is the key to Bangladeshi economy. And it can do a whole lot of things. So the NRC-CAA provides a legal basis by which Indian citizens can then get their government to do specific things in support of the Hindus of Bangladesh. So I'm happy to work with people in India over time. And by the way, with regard to what I'm going to end with and what I said with there, I put my email address in the chat, and I put another link in the chat which refers to what I'm going to talk about now. So I urge people to get in touch with me. This is really, really important. The decisions that often are made by our State Department in Washington are colored tremendously by the information they get from our embassies abroad. And in this case, of course, we're talking about Embassy Dhaka in Bangladesh. And if their embassy keeps telling them, well, we're doing this and we're doing that and things aren't so bad, it makes it more difficult to get the State Department in Washington to recognize how bad things are. But if the embassy says, gee, we're sending these things in, we're seeing these things, we're getting people coming in here, and this is a bad situation, the State Department then might do the things it can do. And that's very important, which is why I'm working with Rabindra Ghosh, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with, to get individuals now to tell their stories at Embassy Dhaka to U.S. officials, and we're working on that process as well. Well, we've got the green light for it. However, this is critical. President Joe Biden has sent the Senate Foreign Relations Committee his nominee to be the new ambassador to Bangladesh. His name is Peter D. Haas, and he's a rather qualified professional. I think he would make a good ambassador. My only concern is his history of making trade deals, and here's why. Achieving a trade deal with the United States has been the Bangladeshi government's holy grail for decades, which makes sense. The U.S. is their largest customer for ready-made garments. As I said, that's the key to their economy. We also fund UN peacekeeping, which provides millions of dollars for Bangladesh. But any benefits they get in our trade relationships through a trade deal tend to mean billions of dollars for that. And while there's nothing wrong with doing that, we can't make the deal itself a priority and then conclude it without demanding specific actions that give Bangladeshi Hindus equal access to the law in reality, not just on paper, protection from the police and government in reality, not just on paper, and for the government to sack those officials, government and police officials who participate in anti-Hindu violence, or its non-prosecution, or its cover-up. They have to be what we require for a trade deal. But this isn't always talked about. And though it's not always consistent, my country is supposed to and does consider human rights in determining relations with other countries. So we have a path to justice, but we can't close it with a trade deal alone. We got to demand these things. So the first thing we have to do is make sure this issue is raised during Mr. Haas's nomination hearings before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That will tell him that this is on the American people's agenda, that it's on the State Department's agenda, that Congress is looking at. But it's also going to put the Bangladeshi government on notice that we're no longer ignoring the atrocities against Hindus there. Now, I'm currently working on 3 different channels to get this issue raised. But there are a lot of different people there, and any help I can get could mean the difference between success or failure. And I know I'm not speaking to U.S. citizens, primarily at least. But maybe you know people who are U.S. citizens and would like to help. And like I said, I put the information in the chat. Members of this committee, it's not a tiny committee. It represents 40% of our 50 states. And about the same percentage of the U.S. population. That's a lot of people who have representation on that committee. And I do know that if people are adamant and strong, and when they talk to their elected representatives, they'll get things done. A lot of opportunities for them to make their concerns to the committee. If you have friends, relatives, or associates who are U.S. citizens, you need to get them to contact their senator on the committee. I can help. As I said, I put my email in the box in the chat so people can contact me what to do. I've also linked to a site that gives the different committee members, so someone can look and say, Senator Ron Portman's on the committee, and I'm from Ohio. I can contact him. So please join me in this. Do everything you can. You can help end a horrible and horribly ignored human rights example, which the concept of being subaltern, both for the victims themselves and for those who determine who others will listen to, that is driving this human rights disaster. So please, you can help save lives. Thank you very much. Dhanyavad.